everyone. Hello, Nadine. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Lisa. I feel like it's been so long.
It's been a while, but in this Trump era, it's like dog years or dog weeks or something. But welcome everyone to the 5, 8 and a half, your midweek break. I'm Lisa Graves. I'm reading the script that says I'm Nadine Smith. Sorry, but I am in fact Lisa Graves. 5 stories, 8 minutes. 8 minutes. I haven't had a drink at all other than milk.
Milk.
And a chance to refuel. We slow things down to stop, reflect, and remember you're not alone. And occasionally we get a little silly. So, silly is a sort of respite from the just damn awfulness that unfolds on a daily basis. So, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I don't think I've been back on since the news came out that I'm starting a new era. I am leaving Equality Florida. I should say it this way. I'm turning in my executive director badge for a donor and volunteer. I'll keep those, but I'm going to be the new president and CEO of Color of Change. So the nation's largest online racial justice organization, and an organization that we need at maximum power as we head into some very tumultuous years between now and the presidential election. So I'm looking forward to it, and it's good to be with everybody. Thanks for the nice notes in the comments.
Yes, let's say congratulations. We'll start off with a glass full.
There we go, a glass full.
Congratulations, Nadine, on this great appointment. They're so lucky to have you over there at Color of Change.
Thank you, my friend.
Your success.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that a lot. Can I tell people you were drinking a giant glass of milk before the camera started rolling? I was roasting you for it, for being so wholesome.
It made me, but I broke my arm about a month or so ago. Maybe now it's coming on 2 months. No, anyway, in October, whenever that was, I broke my wrist and my elbow, and then I thought I really need to up my calcium quantity. So I had, in fact, the proof, not that you needed it, but in fact I was drinking a big old glass of milk because I thought, I got to strengthen these bones around here. But anyway, let's go back to Color of Change, because I was telling folks last time with Greg when he was standing in that I first encountered Color of Change when we launched the ALEC Exposed effort back in 2011.
Yes.
And Color of Change was an instrumental, vital partner in that fight to really have corporate accountability and move corporations to do the right thing, which is not easy to do. And I loved working with them back at the beginnings of that ALEC campaign, and with Rashad and the team over there. And I am also super excited about this new chapter of Color of Change with you at the helm, Nadine. Very excited about the work you're going to do, building on all the amazing work you've done with your lifelong devotion to civil rights and human rights and justice and freedom.
Well, I look forward to, I love that we get to do this together. I'm looking forward to us getting to mix it up, out there on the field as well. And Color of Change has a history of meeting the moment, and there's a big moment ahead, and I'm ready for it. And for folks who've never engaged with Color of Change, you can go check us out at colorofchange.org. I start in the middle of January, but I'm already there in so many ways. And boy, today's show is one of the indicators of how much we need Color of Change to be firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was hoping you were taking some time off, just at least a little time off before you launch in, Nadine. Yeah?
I am. I'm going to power down for the holidays and spend time with my family, because I know when I arrive, I will hit the ground running, and we'll be at a sprint for quite some time. But good people, important work, and the moment for us to turn the tide. And I won't give away the glass half full quite yet, but there's some indicators of the tide turning. But first, we're gonna have to slog through. I'm thinking of, what's the movie, Shawshank Redemption. It was a difficult path to freedom, crawling through that sewage, but eventually we'll get there. How's that for a segue to our first our first
Yeah, I was
uh,
asked the other day what one of my favorite movies is, what love stories or rom-coms, and I said, actually it's Shawshank Redemption. The story of that love, that friendship, is just one of the most beautiful things I think ever depicted in film. And that tunnel was that tunnel of freedom, that really was awful. And I guess it does feel like we're in our own
a
version
metaphor for
of that,
today's times.
of that awful tunnel. So let me put the banner on. And yeah, we're going to jump right into affordability, which, I don't know if anybody saw, there was this event, I'll call it. I'm not going to call it a rally. There was an event in Pennsylvania last night, and this was the event to basically tell people things are fine, prices are fine, don't worry. This affordability is what was he calling it? It was calling it a hoax, because anything a hoax is actually what's real. But the thing that struck me was that the Trump team had printed up signs to hold behind Trump saying lower prices, also bigger paychecks. But like, it was just like, you just could not, like, among the many terrible and ridiculous signs that they've had printed out for people to hold behind him as human wallpaper, the idea that people are rallying him to lower prices when he's been helping to drive prices up, and with total disregard for the effects on real people, other than, I guess, the every term moment where he says he's going to give $12 billion to farmers for screwing things up, which I don't know if actually ever happens for real. But anyway, this rally was just another episode of, I don't know, I guess you can't call it fake news because the news actually covered it, but it was like fakeness of him supposedly having policies that help real people. Bigger paychecks was actually accurate because, unfortunately, the signs were being held by billionaires, by Elon Musk and all those guys. Then it would have been truth in advertising. But they had some guys in suits. Not everyone goes to a rally in a suit, but they managed to find guys in suits to come and hold the bigger paychecks sign. So, yet another example of the scripting that the Trump team engages in to try to create a false impression of reality. But, I would just say not to Trump, because I really don't have much to say to him in particular, but I would just say, like, yeah, you think that prices aren't bad, then, come pay half of our bills and the bills that everyone's dealing with at the grocery store. It's actually shocking how much a single bag of groceries costs these days, from the guy who ran on the price of eggs and then basically turned immediately to his real agenda, which we all knew, other than the people who voted for him, which was billionaires aiding billionaires, getting benefits from billionaires, getting ridiculous gifts from billionaires, getting billionaires to back your ballroom, billionaire, and the big billionaire bill, which he wants to call something else. It's all about the billionaires. And I do think people are waking up. But what are your thoughts, Nadine, on affordability, the supposed affordability hoax, and Trump's cheap promises that he's supposedly going to fix it all?
I think that's a leading question.
Counselor?
Objection. You know what? Here's the good news is this. He stopped pretending that prices are fine. Over Thanksgiving, he's like, everything's fine. Everything's fine. The prices are low. What are you talking about? So now he's finally admitting that the prices are too damn high. And what he's also doing is giving us a preview of how he intends to handle everything, whether it's affordability, whether it's, war crimes, whatever it is, he is just going to swift boat everything. He's going to turn into it, claim it, and then shift the blame rather than actually address it. So, he's literally campaigning against himself at this rally. It'd be like him saying, stop the tariffs, when he is the person responsible for creating the circumstances that we're in. Everybody's talking about the farmers and especially soybean growers, and how China has just, they're no longer buying U.S. soybeans. And so Trump has announced this $12 billion bridge bailout, but farm losses are estimated in the tens of billions, and farmers are saying it's a Band-Aid, not a fix. And polling is showing that up to 80% of Americans are blaming corporate greed and companies exploiting inflation and tariffs to jack up the prices. They're not actually buying the Democrats. But, Trump's approval has dropped to its lowest point of this term, and it's mostly been about affordability. And I think the Mondami victory really began to show people that it is the economy, that it's not just the economy, it's how you talk about it. And I know we will end up talking about this later, but I think instead of feeling like we're being yanked in a bunch of different directions, we should just keep our eye on this ball, which is it is a plunder economy. Everything Trump does is to get his hands either directly on taxpayer money or to rig the system so that his buddies get access to money. Or, for example, when the dust clears, what Doge really was all about was Elon Musk being able to go and destroy the very organizations investigating his companies for, safety violations and other issues. So this is a plunder economy. It is always going to be driven by if you want to know what's happening, follow the money. Who's getting richer? Who's getting, and how are they sending kickbacks to Trump? We are watching in real time Trump just auctioning off pardons that not only get people out of jail, it relieves them of the responsibility to pay restitution. So it is a plunder economy. And once you understand that, everything that he does makes sense.
Yeah, it's a plunderocracy. Under Trump.
Yeah. And speaking of plunder, I want to bring our special guest in because there's some news that has come out about the immigrant detention centers in Florida, in particular, by Amnesty International, and here to talk about it is a good friend and a really brave politician, Florida Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Carlos to the stage. Folks may remember Carlos he was on here once before as one of the lawmakers turned away from alligator Alcatraz. But he's one of the people who has taken DeSantis to court before and successfully sued him.
Correct.
And Carlos, welcome back to the show. It's great to see you.
Hey, Nadine. Hey, Lisa. It's great to see you too. Sorry for the poor lighting. I am in Tallahassee traveling, not in my usual home office studio where I have conversations with you usually. So it's good to be here.
We're thrilled to see you. So we wanted to talk about this really horrifying report that has come out by Amnesty International, everything that caused you and other lawmakers to make surprise visits to these facilities. Can you talk about what we've discovered and also talk about the money and why these facilities are open, how they're open, and why they're allowed to continue to inflict this kind of harm?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Amnesty International just released a really alarming report based on a visit that they recently did actually to the Chrome facility in Miami that talks about many human rights abuses that borderline torture of human beings that are being detained not only at the Chrome Detention Center, which is a federal detention center down in Miami, but also at the so-called Alligator Alcatraz Everglades detention camp, which we know has become infamous, but is also technically a state-run facility that is run by the Florida Division of Emergency Management, which is unprecedented. The Florida Division of Emergency Management has no experience in maintaining a detention center or any sort of prison facility. They basically are tasked with protecting Floridians from hurricanes and other catastrophic natural disasters often, but other emergencies that certainly don't rise to the level of a political crisis that has been declared by this governor to give him the emergency authority that is used to do so much. But to the Amnesty report, what's really disturbing is they talk about how at the Everglades detention camp, the so-called alligator Alcatraz, that detainees were shackled inside a 2-foot high metal cage and left outside without water for up to a day at a time, something that they would be punished for either a non-existent or very, very minor offense or situation that they may have gotten in when they're there in alligator Alcatraz. This is the punishment. Obviously, this is not normal. It's not humane. It borderlines on torture. And if true, the state would have to answer serious questions, as they continue to do, over how people are being treated at the Everglades detention camp. And we have very little knowledge of what's going on there because the governor has operated under this veil of secrecy. Lawmakers like myself, state lawmakers, I'm a state senator, have been denied access and our statutory oversight authority, as we have to do things like make unannounced visits to our state prisons and municipal detention centers. They will not permit us into this site, even though we have the statutory authority to do so. And because of the state of emergency, the governor is able to assume powers that really prevent him from having to be transparent about anything that's going on there. It's allowed him to engage in a number of no-bid contracts to build the Everglades detention camp and spent hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars to enrich his Republican donors. But, these are just disturbing allegations. We're hearing about how detainees at the Chrome detention facility were shackled with their hands but tied behind their backs and made to kneel and eat food out of styrofoam plates like dogs. I mean, these are not human conditions that they're being subjected to, if true.
Carlos, I know when you attempted to make an unannounced visit, which the whole point of having an unannounced visit is to be able to see what is actually happening, not the pageant that they put on.
Not a
visit.
Sanitized tour, right?
And I want to harken back to that because, as you say, this report showed routine prolonged shackling for nonviolent, immigration-only detainees inside the facilities during transfers, 24/7 artificial light and sensory abuse, constant noise, sleep deprivation. This is what Amnesty classifies as a form of psychological torture, and just filthy,
overflowing toilets.
Yes, exactly.
Seeping into areas where they are sleeping.
Right, cells that reek of mold, people being forced to sleep on the floor, and just medical neglect and retaliation for anybody who tries to advocate for themselves or for someone else. When you were able to get into Alligator, I hate calling it that, the Everglade, concentration camp, what you heard things, even though they tried to prevent you and I think it was Senator Jones and others. You left there hearing things that indicated that Americans, in addition to people being detained on immigration, that there were Americans also in these facilities.
Well, sure. I mean, everything they have told us about the Everglades detention camp from the beginning has been a lie. They said right at the beginning before it opened that this was going to be a camp that was intended for the worst of the worst violent criminals. That's not true. There's not only the Amnesty International disturbing report of inhumane conditions and near torture that is being inflicted on these detainees' allegations. We also know, based on a new report and new data that's been released by ICE as a result of litigation and lawsuits against the federal government, we also know that the governor has been lying about the status of those individuals that are being detained at the Everglades detention camp. For example, he insisted, alongside Florida's Division of Emergency Management director, that every single person that was in the Everglades detention camp was on final order of deportation, that they had deportation orders from a judge, that their status had already been established, and that they needed to be removed, deported from the United States, and that everyone that was there at the Everglades detention camp had that final order of deportation. That is a complete lie. According to ICE's own data that they released, it is in fact the case that 31% of the more than 1,200 men who have been held there on or around July 25th, 31% of them had a final order of removal. And then they looked at the data up until October of this year, the most recent data available. And we discovered actually that only 1,200 or so individuals had final orders of deportation. Again, 70% of those individuals that have been detained at the Everglades detention camp have no final orders of removal. So that's a complete lie. And to take it further, forget whether they have a final order of removal or not. Let's just talk about who these people are that are being detained. About 1 in 4 of the more than 6,700 men who have been detained in the Everglades detention camp, only 1 in 4 had what ICE considered to be a criminal conviction. And the most serious conviction that those 1 in 4 individuals recorded by ICE even had, 300 out of more than 1,700, were traffic offenses. Traffic offenses. That was the most serious conviction many of them had. So it is not the worst of the worst. They are not the most violent criminal. We've even seen United States citizens who were detained and brought to the Everglades detention camp only for them to find out, oh, they were citizens, oh, they don't belong there. Then everything was cleared up. But everything we've been told about the Everglades detention camp from the beginning is a lie. So when the state says that no, these human rights abuses are not taking place at the Everglades detention camp, I don't have very much confidence that they're telling the truth.
I am so grateful for your efforts to shine a light on this, Senator. I just want to pause maybe to think about one of the things you mentioned from the Amnesty International report, the idea that, well, I guess there are two related ideas. One is just that no matter whether someone was convicted of a crime, and clearly only a minority of the individuals who were being detained have any conviction, actual criminal conviction. If they were convicted of a crime, there's no right to torture. In fact, the Constitution of the United States forbids cruel and unusual punishment. And the United States, notwithstanding the efforts of Dick Cheney and John Yoo to redefine torture, define torture down, the conditions that have been described in the report clearly qualify as torture as the United States has defined it for decades. But the second point, which was really the point I wanted to underscore, is, this idea that the United States government, that the people who are being paid by us or state officials who are paid by people living in the state of Florida, would put other human beings in basically a heat box to use thermal torture, to use heat as a weapon against these immigrants, harkens back to some of the darkest days of slavery, of the hot boxes that were used on plantations. And let's think about what that 2-foot box or enchained situation is. A casket, an ordinary casket, is 23 inches high. So these are human beings who are being forced to be kept in a space no higher than a casket while shackled in the Florida heat, and for any officer or agent or employee of the state to think that they have a right to do that in our name, they are 100% wrong. That is absolutely morally repugnant, detestable. I hope that the people who are running these camps actually end up going to jail themselves. And I hope that they don't receive any of the kind of treatment that they've treated other people to, because no one, even the people who are the torturers, deserve to be tortured. That is 100% that condition, putting people into casket-like conditions, no matter their offense, and most of them committed no criminal offense, is just incredibly inhuman. It shocks the conscience to hear that along with the other types of treatment that you described are going on in the United States as we speak, round the clock in some instances, or for multiple hours a day. The fact that this is continuing is in part because of this administration, and it's also in part because the Supreme Court has failed to do its job to protect us from these layers of this authoritarianism that are not just ruining Americans' reputations, but literally torturing other human beings.
Exactly right. And again, I just want to restate, this is a horrific report from Amnesty International. The report has not been verified. Of course, it's been denied by the state of Florida. But the reason why reports like these are so hard to both refute and confirm is because of this lack of transparency. State lawmakers like myself are not allowed in there to verify or refute these types of allegations or conditions. The governor has issued a renewal on his so-called immigration state of emergency for the 19th time just a couple of weeks ago, where he is able to continue to use and abuse his emergency authority to keep what is happening in the Everglades detention camp in darkness, the conditions kept in darkness, the transparency with the public, the reporting of data, the reporting of information. The only reason I can sit here and talk to you today and tell you that the average number of detainees that has been held at the Everglades detention camp since July is 729 detainees per day, 729, is because that data was released by ICE as part of a lawsuit against the federal government. It's not because the state is just willingly giving us this information. Everything that we have has been extracted by near legal force. So that is why we have filed a lawsuit, myself and 4 of my other state legislative colleagues, for us to be able to gain our rightful access and oversight into the Everglades detention camp. It's also why I introduced a brand new bill just last week, SB 700. And SB 700 will effectively limit a governor's emergency power not being able to extend a state of emergency for any reason beyond a calendar year. So no future governor, Democrat or Republican, can abuse their emergency authority to keep these types of activities in darkness. And the legislature under our bill would be able to extend a state of emergency beyond a year, but it would require a 2/3 majority, and they would still need to set a termination date no later than the end of the following legislative session. Now, will the governor sign my bill that literally limits his own power? Of course not. But look, the clock is ticking on how much longer Governor DeSantis will be governor of this state. He is term limited, and that 8-year term limit ends in January of 2027, when we will have a new governor sworn in. That is going to be the time that governor needs to decide whether they're going to continue this so-called immigration state of emergency that has been abused to keep what is happening at the Everglades detention camp in darkness. We have to bring it into the light. We have to shut it down, frankly.
Yeah. Can I just pause on that? Because the idea that a governor or any executive has these vast powers, it's sort of inherent powers to declare emergencies. It's one thing if they're actually responding to a hurricane and they need to, control the lights, so that there aren't green lights and red lights or something going on in an area where it's flooded. This is such an inherent abuse. And also it's another sign of the not just creeping, but lurching authoritarianism, because the executive, the governor's job is to execute the laws that you pass, as you know, and you have to have oversight into how the laws that you pass are being implemented. And the idea that he just has free reign to redirect the cash to fund this monstrosity, and to do so while also denying you any access to seeing how the money that actually comes from the legislature is being spent is yet another, as you know from your litigation violation of the longstanding separation of powers, which is supposed to prevent this very type of abuse of an executive basically taking money to do what he wants without regard to the legislature and what the interests of the people of the state are, or the law. And so, I mean, it just is extraordinary that this has been going on. And I so appreciate your efforts to contain it, to try to get this shut down, but also to just make it clear that no governor should ever have this power. No one should be entrusted with this kind of power, which is inherently prone to abuse.
Agreed. And this is the so-called law and order governor. So because of his executive emergency authority that he has abused, he has used this state of emergency as an excuse to actually ignore the laws of this state. 25 laws he has ignored and sidelined with his emergency authority and emergency powers. Laws that, for example, require that state contractors do not have an ethical conflict of interest to take any of these contracts with the state. All of that is waived and pushed to the side. The requirement that government contracts, such as the ones that were used to build this disgusting camp on top of the Florida Everglades, that those contracts would be competitively bid so that we can get the best price for taxpayers to build this disgusting camp. Isn't that a wild thing? All of that's been sidelined. No bid contracts, so that he could basically steer hundreds of millions of dollars to his buddies that have given him large campaign checks over the last several years. It is all corrupt. It is all happening outside of the sunshine and outside of the law, and it needs to end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Senator Smith, thank you for joining us. I know you've got a full schedule, and you've taken time out to join us. We appreciate it. Thank you for the fight. Keep following the money. Keep calling out this corruption, and we hope to have you back again soon.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Lisa. And Nadine, also, congratulations on this amazing new role that you have landed with Color of Change. They are so lucky to have your leadership and your experience and your insights, and you are so needed, not only in Florida, but across the country, to help us get through these difficult times. We need your insights and your leadership. So congratulations.
I appreciate that. Thank you, cousin.
Thank you.
Care.
Wow, that was sobering.
Yeah.
Really, thank you so much for inviting him on, Nadine. That was really something to hear.
Well, he's always a fighter, and it's uphill odds, but the more people hear and learn and cannot look away. One of the things I noted when it was announced that this was being built, I looked up who the contractor was, and the contractor for this previously ran like a party site, like you put up tents for events and parties, and you go, how on earth did this person get any kind of contract for this?
Yes.
Well, follow the money And as Senator Smith was saying, this is corruption. This is payoffs. This is, Florida taxpayer dollars used as a slush fund. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and that does lead us to, to the next topic, which is moving on from torture to war crimes. Thank you all for joining us for this heavy conversation. But really, I mean, I just can't believe, the times we're living in. I cannot believe that we have someone so absolutely unworthy of a position of public trust at the helm of the Defense Department. When you look at Pete Hegseth's actual record, the things he did when he was in the military before he was sort of drummed out, the defenses that he's made before now for war crimes, it really should not be shocking that his time at the Defense Department would be marked by war crimes, since he has basically done everything he can to allow them to continue firing the JAGs, the Judge Advocate General Corps, redeploying them to go over to the Justice Department. Some of them, while disbanding, that core structure, redeploying some of them to go to the Justice Department to quote handle immigration cases. This is someone who Hegseth is someone who has been at the forefront of basically acting like he's like some 8-year-old boy on a playground playing war. That just disreputable speech to the generals, that command performance, and the obnoxious braying of him to people who've actually dedicated their lives to defending this country and to following the rules of war, rules of engagement, as well as the rules that all of our members of the military are taught about not following illegal orders. The pushing out of the person who is the commander in the Caribbean, as this ridiculous scheme to claim that we're somehow at war with Venezuela was unfolding, while they were going to target fishing boats that have a fuel capacity of not the United States on one fell swoop. Right. And then the reports coming out of the closed door meeting on the Hill in Congress about what happened this past September, when not only did this administration just murder people in boats without any court order, without any criminal charges, that they were engaged in drug trafficking, with the evidence blown up if there were any evidence at all of drug trafficking. And also, drug trafficking is not a death penalty offense, and it's certainly not a summary execution offense. Summary execution is something that is not the law of the land in the United States. But then on top of it, the reports coming out over the last 24 to 48 hours that those who saw the film of this attack on this ship, that the reports are that two of the people were waving for help, clinging to the boat before they were murdered in cold blood. It is just like stomach churning, appalling. Yeah. And yet you have this administration, in essence, standing behind both the first acts, which I think were also war crimes, to attack civilians, to murder civilians in that way, but then to murder their survivors violates decades, if not centuries, of U.S. law about people who are prisoners, people who survive an attack, if it were even actual military engagement. And as I wrote for my Substack last week, this has also been a situation where John Roberts has unleashed the hounds of hell, basically, by that order giving Trump immunity from criminal prosecution. In that same order of the court, that same, in my view, illegitimate ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, I noted that John Roberts had gone out of his way to say that the pardon power is beyond the ability of any court to contain. And so, it's not just that Trump has immunity from criminal prosecution. We now have someone in the White House who can then pardon the people who conduct war crimes on his behalf, or at his bidding or at his instigation or at the wink and nod, he can pardon them with impunity under the way this Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, has interpreted the law. And I did point out that a couple weeks ago, John Roberts went to a screening of the film Nuremberg, and I heard that there were sort of some uncomfortable moments there because the film includes the prosecutor for the U.S. prosecutor for the war crimes, the Nazi war crimes at the Nuremberg trials, talking about how you cannot, the way to protect civilization basically is that everyone must be subject to the law, that no one can be above the law, or we are in true peril. And so, yeah, I am astonished. And I am also sort of not surprised given Hegseth's pattern of behavior, but also Trump previously in the first term pardoned men who were convicted of war crimes, court-martialed by their fellow soldiers for murdering people in cold blood, and Trump paraded them at rallies and raised money off of pardoning war criminals. So A, not surprised, but B, 100% totally appalled.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we have to just make sure everyone understands, what has happened, because since September, the U.S. has launched at least 22 missiles on small boats. These are not ships. These are small boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. We have killed at least 87 people, all under the drug interdiction label. And the one you're talking about, September 2nd, the strike that killed 9 out of the 11 people on this Venezuelan boat, and they clung to debris. And I can only imagine as they saw they were waving for help. And 40 minutes later, a second strike was ordered that killed the 2 survivors, clinging to that wreckage. And 2 more strikes were used to finally sink the boat. And, as hard as it is to hear about the torture happening at Chrome and in the Everglades, and to see what is being done in our name with our tax dollars without remorse. I mean, this is psychopathic behavior.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to build within ourselves is the fortitude to stop thinking that there are any norms that will be abided. I know people were asking, hey, wasn't the Everglades detention camp shut down? Didn't they lose a court case? Yes, it should be shut down. It should never have been built. And, he was just able to find another court that would stay that decision while things move at a snail's pace through the courts. In the same, he not only pardoned people guilty of war crimes, but restored their rank, restored their benefits. I mean, so we have to move past the place where this is unexpected. It should always feel horrific to us. And I think we also have to, be careful of the language, because we're not at war. I mean, these are violations of human rights.
Yeah.
These are violations of human rights under U.S. law and under international law. And what it's going to take is for us to do things that are beyond the normal ways that we think we should respond. Like, we're going to have to show up places. We're going to have to speak out. We're going to have to engage our neighbors so that people who aren't tuning in hear about this. And all of us live in a overlapping Venn diagrams of people who, maybe they voted for this guy because they really thought he was going to bring down, prices, or they really thought, hey, I work off tips. I'm going to get a better deal on tips. They're really trying to seal us under this propaganda dome. But we've got to, we have to do the work of engaging our friends, our family, our coworkers, and pushing back. We should be lighting up the phones in the Senate and in Congress. we got to be knocking doors. We got to be involved in campaigns to oust these people. We've got to speak with this kind of outrage about what is happening, and make people who want to put their head in the sand understand that we are all complicit, because those missiles are bought with our tax dollars. And so I know that this is heartbreaking to hear, to think about, to see, but we don't have the luxury of tuning out. So, and the fact that American people are sort of turning on Trump. DeSantis is a lame duck and weakening by the day. And we are seeing, and we'll talk about it in the glass half full, voters, turning away from this hateful MAGA messaging. But I really hope that you don't lose heart, that you don't take this in and think that all hope is lost. We go back to our metaphor from Shawshank Redemption. It is going to be a long slog through those pipes, but we are going to get to freedom on the other side.
Yeah. I'm going to call an audible and say, let's talk about Texas and ACLU and the other ICE report coming out of Fort Bliss conditions another night, because I feel like we've had a pretty heady dose of the awfulness, and we are trying to be your midweek break. And I think there's another story of Texas that is really important. And it will lead to the fifth topic on the Supreme Court. But I also just want to say, like, this decision that came down, another emergency docket decision from the Supreme Court that allowed the Texas gerrymandered maps that are racially disparate, that are in violation of the Voting Rights Act, to allow that to go forward, which has the effect of displacing Jasmine Crockett out of Congress. This is a sort of bellwether of the future consequences of this Supreme Court trying to bleach out Black representation from the South in Congress. But, we have seen in response that Jasmine Crockett has said she is going to run. And, she has been such a great outspoken voice. That's why Trump has targeted her, has spoken so disparagingly of her. That's why some of the sort of right-wing MAGA people in Congress have sought to insult her, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's, somehow become so alienated by Trump, she's going on 60 Minutes to talk about how terrible he is. But in the meantime, I do remember her calling out Jasmine Crockett, and Jasmine Crockett taking none of it, none of that abuse, and responding back to Greene in really, strong terms in response to her statements. And I don't know Representative Crockett, but I do know that she is someone who does not pull her punches. And so I'm excited to see what happens next in her new campaign.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we are seeing is that we got more fighters who are running for office, and people who are not, being hamstrung by a phony kind of respectability. They are speaking, plainly to the American people. They're talking about the issues that matter, and they are not intimidated by Trump and company. So, there are indications that the tide is turning, but I know I'm with you about us not piling on too much more, though I think it is important to say that if anyone really thought Venezuela was ever about drugs, I think tonight there was the U.S. seized an oil tanker. This is so clearly about resources. This is so clearly about Venezuela's significant, it's the largest proven crude oil reserves in the world. And that has everything to do with America finding a justification, just as Putin did to invade Ukraine. The U.S. is formulating a justification to invade Venezuela.
Yeah, one of the I don't know if people know this, but when Nadine and I were putting together with Greg and with the amazing graphics team, with the 5/8, the little banners. One of the banners for me is this button that I made 34 years ago, that reads "No blood for oil." And if there's a through line to U.S. foreign policy, going back to the intervention of the CIA in Iran to keep the Shah installed or install the Shah in the face of an effort by local democracy movement in Iran to share the wealth of the oil that was discovered before then. That not that that's the original sin. That's just one of many, but just to take that as an example, about 75 years ago, that changed the course of not just Iranian history, but U.S. history, to deny that democracy movement and instead have a leader, a repressive leader who was more than happy to cooperate with the oil companies, in essence, at the behest of our CIA and of Britain. That was one of those sort of original sins. And you can look at a whole other array of foreign policy in the U.S. that has been driven by financial interests. Certainly, the actions again by the CIA back in the 70s to basically depose and block Salvador Allende over the copper mining and the copper mines, another extractive industry, and allow for the rise and multi-year rule of a cruel dictator in Pinochet. You can look at obviously what happened not just in the first Gulf War, where there was a tremendous effort to try to have international sanctions rather than have the U.S. Use military force in the dispute between Kuwait and Iraq. Again, it was about oil. It was about oil and control of oil. The second, Gulf War, I know I'm reciting history to you all, but this notion that in the aftermath of attacks by Saudi citizens on the towers in the United States, on the World Trade Towers and on the Pentagon, that then Bush and Cheney in particular, would turn that into a rationale for going into Iraq and finishing the job, in essence, again, about oil. And then here we are with yet another pretext, the idea of drugs in Venezuela, at the same time that Trump pardoned, someone who was
the Honduran president
who was literally convicted of flushing more than 400 tons of cocaine into the United States. No reality matters. Like nothing matters in the hypocrisy, in the principle inconsistency, when you have a president of the United States who, on the one hand, would pardon someone who literally, pushed drugs into our communities, and then on the other hand, claim a right to attack Venezuela based on drugs, when it's really about the oil. And the seizure of the oil tanker tonight is just another sign of how much Trump foreign policy is a lie. It's built on lies. It's all about telling lies. And in this sense, in terms of oil and extraction being the sort of currency of the worst elements of U.S. foreign policy in the modern era, here we are again. It's not just Trump, but it is Trump in this instance, putting this acquisition, this greed, this avarice, this effort to dominate oil ahead of policies on democracy and peace and more. And you have it at a time when Trump is decimating efforts to actually invest in solar and renewable energy, the effort to sort of claw back the grants on climate, even pressure, it seems, to have the University of Nebraska cut its climate science program in its entirety as somehow illegitimate, when we are facing a real climate crisis and we need to try to leave it in the ground, not extract it further, and not basically adopt an oil colonialism, a new oil colonialism of the U.S., thinking that it has the right to basically just take the oil of Venezuela because Trump wants it. That's my rant.
Plunder economy. It is always follow the money. It is always about enriching himself. And once you understand that, everything else makes sense. Well, we are nearly at the top of the hour, and before we go, we like to end with a segment that we call the glass half full. And obviously, we are not ignoring what is broken, but it's important that we remind ourselves of what's still beautiful, what's still bold, what's still possible. And sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's a moment, and sometimes it is an election that fills our cup just a little bit. And so prepare the vessel of the beverage of your choice, be it milk or water. We are so wholesome tonight. We are so wholesome tonight. But what we want to celebrate tonight is the elections that happened last night. Not simply for the wins, but for what they portend. In Florida, pro-democracy wins were racked up even in very tough terrain. In Miami-Dade, there was a Democratic wave. Eileen Higgins won the mayor's race. What we saw, she defeated a candidate that Trump went all in for. Democratically aligned candidates held or expanded ground in multiple municipal runoffs across Miami-Dade. And they framed the races around affordability, transit, and basic governance, an anti-corruption message. And it outperformed those who were pushing the usual culture war messages. And local turnout rose disproportionately in Democratic precincts. And this is continuing a pattern that we began to see in the Virginia elections, in the California elections. We also saw, the extremist Moms for Liberty candidates in Broward losing ground again. This is the third cycle in a row. Democratic and progressive candidates also ran ahead of expectations in Orlando. And Republicans who tried to nationalize their local races and use this anti-woke rhetoric and really wrap themselves around the axle of, Trump's political machinery were just destroyed. We saw it in Georgia as well. While there weren't big statewide races, the Atlanta metro suburbs, Democratic candidates flipped 2 city council seats. Turnout was strongest, and this is really important, among younger multiracial precincts, the same coalition that had lifted purple and red states into more progressive territory. So we are seeing now the evidence of what the polling was beginning to tell us. And that is that, voters are not moving to the right. They're rejecting this chaos. The winning formula is affordability, transparency, competent government. People aren't falling for culture war garbage, and they're calling out the corruption. The phony political operatives calling themselves Moms for Liberty, they are losing ground everywhere. And abortion rights remain a vote getter, everywhere. The Trump coalition isn't expanding. It's beginning to feed on itself. I guess you can only have so many psychopaths in a room trying to stuff their pockets before they turn on each other. So, I think that it is appropriate to end a night like tonight with the recognition that while it is not moving nearly as fast as we want it to, it is moving in the correct direction. We are seeing part of that coalition, the lies that they've told to Hispanic voters, to Somali voters, are being exposed. And so, they're losing Hispanic voters who they had appealed to, pretty desperately last time. They're losing them, hand over fist. And so I think we have to keep reminding people that Trump has made it less affordable. He is destroying our institutions that are supposed to look out for us. They are diverting money that is supposed to help us in the midst of an emergency to line their own pockets. That the things that ought to work for us aren't working because corruption means that those dollars are going to either Trump or his buddies, or these Trump light governors like DeSantis. And finally, voters are showing up to deliver the message that we're not having it anymore. And to those voters across Florida and Georgia, we raise our glasses and we toast you, a glass half full. That's some primo water right there. Primo. Cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you get a chance, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe. Encourage friends to subscribe. Share the show on social media, and please do follow us both on our Substacks, Grave Injustice. Wait.
Yeah, it is. It's Grave Injustice.
Justice and wideawakeamerica.org. And I'm Nadine Smith on behalf of Lisa Graves. Thanks for making space for the 5-8.5, your midweek breather. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And we will see you next Wednesday, 8 o'clock Eastern. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.